The resource knowledge area has 6 processes in it, 2 in planning, 3 in executing, and 1 in monitoring and controlling. Our first process is plan resource management, which basically gives us a resource management plan or how we expect to manage those resources. And also a team charter, which is basically a team document about how the team is going to hold itself accountable, values, characteristics, etc. So that it can run itself as much as possible. So, we look at things like the scope baseline so we can get a feel for what the project is supposed to include, so we can make sure that we have an appropriate approach to managing resources, and that we have an appropriate type of team charter as well. And that team charter can be influenced by organizational theory. How we're gonna put the team together, what characteristics are important, etc. Now from there we get into our next planning process, estimate activity resources. In past PMBOK guides, this was actually a schedule, or it used to be called the time knowledge area process. So what's going on here is we are creating resource requirements. So what kind of resources do we need? What characteristics do they have? What skills do they need to have? What quantities of them do we need? When do we need them? And remember, this is not just personnel. This could be physical resources as well, materials, equipment. And that resource breakdown structure can be used, and in this case we're going to show where those resources are allocated across the project. Not who reports to who necessarily, like an org chart would show, but where those resources are allocated. Now, to do that, as far as those resource estimates, we could do things like bottom-up, analogous, or parametric estimating, depending upon what information or knowledge we have in the project environment. And we're going to take things like the activity list, cost estimates, resource calendars. So we're looking at what we need done, what we expect it to cost, when are potential resources available, and things like that to influence what our requirements are going to look like. Now from there we get into the executing process group. The first of our 3 executing processes is acquire resources. So basically, I say in my public classes, this is getting butts in seats, so to speak, if you're getting people. So physical resource assignments would be material, equipment, etc. Project team assignments would be people. Those are your 2 big things that come out of this process. Resource calendars show when you expect them to be available and working. Change requests are created as needed to make adjustments as it relates to resources. Now, negotiation could help you get those resources. Pre-assignment could, meaning they're already allocated, and virtual teams can as well. Every day, virtual teams, virtual employees are getting more and more popular, and they have their own set of challenges. It's not necessarily the people, but there's just a lot of value in being able to walk down the hall and look somebody in the eyes. But the world's getting smaller as a result, and virtual teams are getting bigger. Now, from there we get into our next executing process, which is develop teams. So what we're doing here is basically taking that group of people and turning them into a high-performing unit. Ideally, we're getting an output greater than the sum of the parts. So I've got the team charter, so I know how the team is going to hold itself accountable. We've got team assignments and resource calendars, so we know when people are expected to be working and on what. We've got co-location, so ideally, if we have this, they're in a war room. Virtual teams could be the case as well, where people are connected virtually throughout the country or world. Now, when it comes to develop team, there's a lot of soft skills that come into play. You could have things like conflict management to minimize bad conflict, influencing or motivating people, negotiating to get people on the same page, and then team building. So team building is really going on here with this process, because you're basically trying to break down any barrier that keeps people from gelling as well as possible. So coming out of this, you have team performance assessments. How is the team working as a whole? And change requests, where you can make adjustments to how the team is working or what they're doing. Now from there we get into our final executing process, manage team. And so basically, I'm going to quote my CPA a number of years ago. They said, as long as you have employees, you're going to have employee stuff to deal with. And that's not a slam on employees. It's just we as humans, if you have kids, sometimes they're sick, Sometimes there's an accident on the way to work. Sometimes you forgot something, you got to go back home and get it. You need a new piece of software on your computer. You need a new computer. Your computer broke. You know, stuff happens. So managed team is basically just keeping things going forward. You know, dealing with stuff that comes up that gets in the way of keeping the team being as productive as possible. And then from there, our final process for this knowledge area is control resources. So the pattern we've seen with monitor this or control that, we have work performance data as an input, work performance information as an output, change requests, project management plan updates, and project document updates as outputs. Now, what's going on with this process, though, above and beyond that, is we are basically using this as a feedback loop to any of these processes in this knowledge area at a minimum, where we could perhaps change the team charter, we could perhaps change our approach to managing resources, we could change out resources if needed or when they're available, you know, a number of different things. So basically this is where you potentially make adjustments as it relates to resource-related items on the project. Now, I want to clarify, when I say make adjustments, you could create a change request, and if Perform Integrated Change Control says yes, then that would be an approved change that you would implement. But if it doesn't get approved, then, well, you tried. So that's basically what's going on with this knowledge area. 6 processes, 2 in planning, plan resource management and estimate activity resources, 3 in executing, that's acquire resources, develop team, manage team, and then 1 in monitoring and controlling, control resources.